Welcome to the Xceptional Insights podcast. I'm Sean Wargo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Peter Hansen.
Hello.
Together, we make up the market intelligence team here at Avixa,
Where it's our job to identify trends in the economy and understand how they affect our industry, the professional audiovisual industry.
Welcome back to another installment of Xceptional Insights. Peter Hansen and Sean Wargo here to discuss another stimulating topic for our industry. This time, we want to talk about growth rates and growth for our industry. The latest IOTA forecast estimates that we will add about $100 billion from 2023 all the way to 2028. So $300 billion in 23 and then almost over $400 billion for 2028. Just a little context there. Everybody sort of thinks, wow, those are big numbers. Mm-hmm. However, if we look at some adjacent industries, IT, for example, a $5 trillion industry, consumer technology, a $1 trillion industry. So while I wouldn't say ProAV is cottage, we are still smaller, even as we collide, intersect, overlap with some of the other categories. But what we want to talk about today is that $100 billion. Where does it come from? What are the likely candidates? What are some challenge areas? Just a couple quick thoughts on my side. We do note, as we look at solution areas, one of the areas of the ways in which we segment our market, things like digital signage, conference and collaboration. We still note some recovery in our market. So over the last, year or two that we've been doing these kind of recordings and presentations about our industry, we've talked about recovery in our industry, recovering from the pandemic low, the massive decline we faced in 2020, and the build back. So there are still market segments like live events, performance entertainment, where there's some return to growth. And we also see things like other or greenfield categories, the proverbial other, offering a significant amount of growth. And I think that's what we're probably going to talk most about today is what does that other mean? Where does it come from? So start with you, Peter. What's your thought? Where do we see that growth coming from?
Yeah, I mean, the first piece that jumps out at me is that recovery that you talked about. And I'll expand a little bit on live events and performance and entertainment. And now the kind of distinction between those two similar solution areas is kind of fixed installation, like your existing sports venue versus, traveling, Taylor Swift.
Right.
And now some folks might be thinking like, well, didn't that kind of recover in 2022 a little bit? 2023, we're back, right? I mean, Taylor Swift, right? But what we see kind of when you kind of get into the weeds and it shows up in IOTA and it shows up in the data collection there is that these folks, especially those live events, the traveling, the non-fixed installation folks, were hit so hard in the pandemic that they're digging themselves out of this financial hole. They're stretching out a little bit of the replacement cycle. They're making do with technology that maybe they would have replaced in a different financial cycle. So it's taking them a little longer. Like the staffing is probably pretty much fully recovered, but when you kind of get into the nitty-gritty Pro AV revenue, hardware-driven, it's not back there yet. So that's going to take a bit of a while. Full recovery, 24, 25 kind of window, depending on exactly where you're looking. And that's a big part. Now, looking out longer, expanding their horizons, just take your pick, There are so many questions. One piece that I want to hit early too, because I know there are folks out there who hear a number like $100 billion and say, "No way! Global Pro AV is only $60 billion or $80 billion." They have their numbers, right? And so one point I want to emphasize in that is that we take a relatively expansive view at what counts as the TAM, achievable, especially not even like just addressable, but like kind of like goal type like market for Pro AV. And that includes a lot of IT technology that a lot of AV integrators say, no, that's not us. But the reason that we include that is twofold, we'll say. One is, take a look at Infocom. Companies come to Infocom and they want to see everything, right? They all these different people have their different. We do X, Y, Z, and people do. Well, I do Z, but I also do A, B, and then I do B and Z, and also C and D. Right? It's like it's this mix. So we want to have all these things that, like, if you're a more live events person, it's there for you. If you're more digital signage, it's there. For conference and collaboration, it's there for you. And part of that is the IT backbone. It's so vital to all of this. Even if you're a traditional integrator, really, really, A and V and none of the IT, it's still part. You got to partner. You're partnering with someone. You're relying on that technology. So we say, hey, it's there. And then the other part, why we have this is because part of folks who are actually like the IOTA users, the subscribers, they're using the dashboard to subset to what actually matters to them. I don't care about APAC, or I'm only in the US. Okay, I'm only doing these 4 solution areas. And all of a sudden the number looks like, oh, wow, it's way more plausible. It's like, it's 15 billion, like it's not even 800 million here, this segment, whatever, because you slice and dice and get down to what you really want. And lots of different companies can slice and dice and get down to what they really want. So it's really big, and a big part of that growth, one of the big parts of the areas, AV, IT conversions, it's IT. It's the IT backbone, adding a lot of $1 billion to that 100 billion.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're talking about there is a definitional thing, and I think it's really important as people look at our numbers to understand kind of how we are drawing that TAM circle, because part of the growth, if we looked at, say, past forecasts, right, that might have said 2023 is going to be 250 or 280 billion, and now we're up to a 300 billion. Some of that is definitional. Some of it is that we purposefully start to include new technologies. They could be media servers, they could be network attached storage or backbone infrastructure, because our solutions as an industry rely on the backbone, right? Rely on the network and special configuration, installation of networks to support distribution of content. So great point that some of the 100 billion and even potential upside beyond 100 billion comes from just definition of terms, additional inclusion of technologies, sectors, components that, while we're sitting and looking at it today, we may not include, but down the road we have to start including. So absolutely a great note. And also the recovery for live events and for fixed installation, performance entertainment is real. That was the last sector that we had thought, even through the entire forecast period, would be recovering. Hardest hit, first in, last out, kind of notion. The first to really feel the impacts and the last to really recover from it. What I'm noticing in the data too, though, is, as you said, the recovery point for both fixed install and for live events, 24, 25, depending on part of world and sectors. That's the point at which we say we're net growing beyond past peak. So 2019, past peak for our industry. So new revenue. And I think that's something that we might want to explore a little bit. While we all have talked about conference and collaboration, the technologies that allow us to stay connected and productive, that has been an important part of the recovery period, and even for truth be told, actually never declined, right? Conference never declined. But growth forward is 3% versus 6-8 for some of these more still recovering categories. The point I want to make there is what we seem to be shifting toward, and in some ways away from, is just conversations about corporate and conference and collaboration, and more towards immersive experiences. So a live event, a Taylor Swift concert, or an experience like the Sphere that's going to open up in Las Vegas, a fixed install, just amazing Pro AV installation, let's call it what it is, right? At the end. Those are the kinds of things that I think drive us as an industry as we go forward, because the demand from that market and the customer that's going to those events and locations is wanting a one-up. They want next level. They want, AR, VR. They want immersive sound. They want high-end video, beyond 4K resolutions in some cases. Right. So, and displays everywhere. Yeah. So I think, to me, part of this $100 billion story is pushing the frontiers of immersive experience. Absolutely. And great story for us as an industry, because while corporate office spaces are a lifeblood for us, so too. And the better value prop is in perhaps more of this immersive experience. So it's right in our wheelhouse. So it's a great area for us. Yeah. Anything else kind of similar that you would see?
Well, I would say, you talked about corporate office space. For me, that's one of the big questions about the 100 billion. I mean, corporate vertical market, our biggest vertical market, conference and collaboration, biggest solution. What happens? We talked a fair bit about it. We talked about it on most of our podcast episodes on some level, that we don't know what the 2028 corporate office looks like, and we're using research to get closer, and we're staying plugged in to what best practices are. And we've got a lot of data says, hybrid models solidifying. Corporate office market is not as bad as, some scary headlines. Like, it's okay. I mean, it's not. I don't want to be invested there, but it's not doom. It's okay. And in IOTA, we take this kind of conservative look. Like, AV is doing all right there. We're seeing a little bit of growth. Maybe that's because of, type A, flight to quality, focusing in on, we're gathering here to use the AV setup.
Right.
I'm gesturing for those of you who listen. I'm gesturing towards our camera and our microphones here. That's why we're here in person today, because it's got the tech that we need, and some concentration of that. So that's a definite positive. And maybe it ends up being really vociferous, corporate office is more stronger than we think today, and it's more AV focused than we think today. And the 3% ish growth that we talk about there is too conservative and it's stronger than that. But it's totally possible that those doomsday headlines are okay. I don't think that I think the worst headlines are ridiculous. I'll say that's maybe not quite possible without a new crisis, but that there's more truth than I want to believe, that I currently believe that any of us wants to see, and so that's a negative. So I see that as, a really interesting question. Now, you talked a lot about immersive experience. I want to emphasize, before the pandemic, we were talking so much about the experience economy, and then it was the goods economy for 2020, 2021. We saw big supply issues. I mean, it was, bikes and kayaks and all these things people could purchase to do separately from other people. And I see no reason why the experience economy doesn't come back. The fundamentals, people are gathering again. I see that coming back. And that was such a driver of robust growth for our industry in the 2010s. I see it again. So I see it a big part. Now, one other point you mentioned, immersive experience, screens everywhere. I want to bring up AI. Right. The challenge, so much of the challenge for digital signage is, do you have the content to feed it? Well, enter a generative AI that is brilliant at making neat content. It's not to say it's, you just type in a prompt and it's perfect. It's a lot of work. Lord knows it's harder, easier said than done. But it's something that, especially we're talking, by 2028, that process is probably going to be pretty neat. It's probably going to be a lot smoother than hiring, a load of human animators, human copy creators to fuel consistent new technology for your airport, or new content, I should say, for your airport digital signage, for your roadside digital signage, for all of the digital out of home. So I see that as an upside. Although I also, and I'll talk about a little bit, I'll let you go on AI, but I do see some potential negatives for AI. So let's hit the positives first.
For sure. I mean, so this is one of those technologies, one of those points in time, right, where we're looking at a disruptive force and kind of debating the good versus bad, the contribution versus detriment that it might have to sector or whatnot. What history has proven in these cases is often it is an accelerator, right? It's a multiplier of productivity, of growth, all those sorts of things. And so I think that's the case for Pro AV too. You've given a great example, generative AI for content creation. There's also AI that we already see in just conference room, optimization, right?
Yeah.
Camera placement, microphone optimization, all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
AI helping us through algorithms, maybe
Mm-hmm.
simple form AI,
Mm-hmm.
kind of helping us to make a better, more equitable conference experience. I also think of it as a technology that helps power managed services. So
Mm-hmm.
the ability to offer an AI kind of powered solution for remote monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
diagnostic, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. So
Security.
helping,
Mm-hmm.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
helping integrators that are resource constrained, as we
Mm-hmm.
know, hard to find staff, and have always been challenged by servicing,
Mm-hmm.
supporting a managed service offering
Mm-hmm.
through staff. So AI kind of helps
Mm-hmm.
augment that capability. So overall, yes, I one of the debates happening, so kind of looking at over and under opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
For you raise conferencing collaboration, and yeah, our fairly conservative outlook on it. I think one of the debates happening in the industry is that's a potential challenge for us is, are we looking at more of a volume or a value play? And so
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that could potentially impact revenue, there could be a give and a take, is if we are more towards a volume play where
Mm-hmm.
technology is standardized, the end user can buy it,
Mm-hmm.
let's not say off the shelf, but in sort of bundle form. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
through a distributor, maybe it's through
Mm-hmm.
some sort of direct offering from a manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of downplays the benefit the channel has,
Mm-hmm.
the advantage that it brings, the value proposition that it
Mm-hmm.
brings to the table. So if conference rooms through Microsoft Team Room or other sorts of
Mm-hmm.
solutions, if they become fairly standardized, that's less of an opportunity. There's less markup. There's
Mm-hmm.
less integration revenue for us. But on the other side of that is actually we're hearing, AI perhaps being a component of this, is a more customized approach. We're in
Mm-hmm.
as we talked about in past podcasts, we've talked about perpetual beta, the need for a more customized solution for your
Mm-hmm.
conferencing needs because your particular business processes and
Mm-hmm.
outcomes are require certain types of solutions over others. So that would potentially argue for more upside for
Mm-hmm.
conferencing and collaboration
Mm-hmm.
and the corporate market as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So that might pull us up above the 3% that we're
Mm-hmm.
forecasting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, there's probably going to be a dichotomy here
Mm-hmm.
and a continuum of offerings from very standardized all the way up through custom. That's the beauty of our
Mm-hmm.
marketplace. So I guess that's another question, a dynamic that the
Mm-hmm.
market's always wrung its hands over
Mm-hmm.
is, do we get to a more plug and play, customized,
Mm-hmm.
less customized, more standardized approach to solutions? I don't know if you have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, where do we go from here?
That's my fear with AI, is that the capabilities of AI enable a lot of plug and play. So imagine a conference room that maybe in the past you had, several microphones to pick up the, to figure out what's the loudest sound and to pick it up and to, to communicate it clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the past 2-3 years, we've seen microphones that actually haven't always even been marketed as like AI powered microphones, but that's roughly what they are. What they do is they, figure out the shape and size of the room, and then figure out like where the voices are coming from. Figure out exactly what's the loudest voice, even if it's maybe quiet at the microphone. It's not the loudest sound. They're not picking up. They're not just magnifying the loudest sound. They're figuring out what is the actual like loudest point of source. They're maybe doing some even smarter things to figure out who's the lead speaker, not just the noisy background noise, and filtering all that other stuff out to have a really high quality stream of audio for your hybrid meeting, despite being only one microphone source. Probably with several microphones in it to be able to do distance and location. And the same thing with cameras, a relatively limited number of cameras that you don't have to do too much to figure out pointing, focusing, etc. Because the software side is identifying the faces, bringing them into focus, putting them on screen where they need to be. That's where I see AI as a potential negative for Pro AV, that it's essentially taking, the professional aspect of kitting out a conference room and doing it with software instead of hardware and design skills.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is, the resource, the human capital in this was where the accommodation for imperfection, let's call it, in space, in placement, in all sorts.
The uniqueness of the space.
Right. So AI kind of replacing some of that mode. A possibility for sure.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. Our audience, I'm sure some out there, CTSers included, would probably debate. It's like, how much can that be done by software? Essentially, since AI ultimately a software offering to come in and replace, in this case, human knowledge, human resource that would focus on something. We've already seen, in fact, our forecasts show. I was surprised certainly to see that software as a whole is the largest product area of growth in our market. Over 11%, around 11% growth, I believe it was, for software, revised up from what we had seen in the past. So we're already seeing kind of AI creep in, perhaps in a fashion where more and more. Not always replacement, but certainly software being used to augment hardware. Some cases replace, but at the very least, what we've seen is a decoupling of software offering from hardware offering. It used to be that they were more bundled together, and so it had become very hard for us to split out as an area of opportunity. But clearly another area of growth where more and more of those capabilities can be served with AI/software versus a hardware or human component. The question too there is another way this plays out is we've been deliberate in trying to define AAV as being, broadly speaking, back-end infrastructure, software components, technologies that arguably more IT. So if things became more standardized and software driven, it could mean that the role of the AV specialist kind of is diminished over time and challenged. And so the 100 billion that we're talking about gets parsed off to other adjacent industries. So I think that's part of what we're talking about too is, what in the end, it becomes a definitional conversation about, well, what is AV in that case? If IT is setting up a conference room with standardized tech that AI is then managing to account for imperfections in space and placement and all that sort of stuff, or light, then what's the role for AV at that point? Is there a role for specialist as we go forward? Sounds sort of doom and gloom. And I think, we may be straying towards a pessimistic kind of outlook. Where else, though? What are we missing, though? And I would bring up an example here, healthcare. Our numbers for healthcare, given how much is spent on healthcare as just a total area for a consumer, it would seem to be a small opportunity. I'll note that right now, what we don't have in IOTA specified as solutions are things like patient care facilities, waiting rooms, digital signage. You could say there's a piece of that. You could say that maybe some of the collaboration spend is in remote serving of patients. But what else? Is there something else here? Maybe it's a theme with hospitality, something like that.
Well, I think one of the things is a mix of two things you just said, healthcare and hospitality. Private equities come into healthcare in a big way in the past decade, probably more. And one of their primary, let's say, in quotes, insights is that you can drive revenue by making your healthcare be hospitable. That you're going to get more patients if your, office is bright and welcoming and there's free water and the patient care rooms are nice. And how do you make a space welcoming? I mean, loads of industries play a hand in that, architecture, design, etc. But Pro AV, absolutely, I promise you. Or we're in those private equity funded, really welcoming spaces in the healthcare space right now. So it's that mix of hospitality and healthcare there. I want to bring up one more question and potential downside even on the 100 billion, which is a region. We talked about solutions, we talked about verticals. I want to talk about a region. China, APAC. The negative is China specifically. in terms of downside risk. Just the news and the long-term growth prospects have kind of been sour lately. Higher youth unemployment, graying population, real estate value issues. China, APAC in general, and China in particular have been this big engine of our growth pre-pandemic for a decade and probably more. The GDP growth there is really strong, and our industry is so diverse. We reflect that, and that's looking weaker. China specifically. Now, counterpoint. The positive, I'd say, like, if we miss it, it's, from a geographic perspective, if we miss the 100 billion, I would think it probably happened because China is disappointing in terms of growth. From a geographic perspective, if we beat that 100 billion, I'm probably thinking APAC. I'm still thinking APAC, but I'm thinking India. I'm thinking Vietnam. I'm thinking Philippines. There are a lot of countries over there with huge populations, young populations, burgeoning middle class, that could drive a lot of pro AV revenue in that retail, infotainment kind of retailtainment, shopping, immersive experience, tourism for all of these countries that are having big GDP growth and maybe hitting that kind of level of GDP. From developing to developed, or developed light, let's say, where all of a sudden a lot of pro AV revenue happens. So I see both a downside risk, a reason we maybe miss 100 billion. If the dice roll out the wrong way, and also a positive, over there. I think some countries that could, really surprise and be, instead of China, it's the Philippines, it's Vietnam, it's India. All of a sudden that we're talking about on our podcast, the engine, our annual IOTAs. Wow, it's this big burst of growth coming from that region, and it's a different country. So
yeah,
we'll see.
It makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I think, we talked about, say, venues and events and those sorts of things, hospitality, but retail is a segment there that, we think of retail in developed world, like U.S. and Europe, as perhaps grew too fast, is shifting more online, but there's many parts of developing worlds where retail footprint is less and has an opportunity to kind of create, as you said, retailtainment sort of options.
Yeah, go from some really rough and ready stuff to some really pretty stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And there's concepts of that here in the States and in Europe, as well as retail as destination, much more brand, less kind of product transactional orientation. That's been a kind of a natural evolution as retail has differentiated itself. I think probably, do I see a lot of upside globally there? I think it's fairly baked in, but so I think our predictions for retail are pretty good. But digital signage as an aspect has a lot of upside potential for sure. We talked about performance entertainment. We talked about live events. So clearly engines of growth as we go forward. And I think we've pretty well covered. Are there any other challenges you might point to?
No,
on that
honestly,
side,
I would say we've said upsides, we've said downsides.
Yeah.
I feel good about the number where we're at. The 100 billion, the growth rate we're talking about. I think some negatives will hit. I think some positive will hit. I think we're about right. I'm already excited for the next iteration to see our temperature check, how we're doing, what the new numbers are. But I feel good about it. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely feel good about the 100 billion. I think that the amount, so the 300 to 400 billion, there's probably movement there, right? I think as we redefine, there's going to be some natural increase just in size of market, right? That doesn't necessarily tell a different growth story, though it may. We haven't touched yet on something like AR, VR. What does that mean for Pro AV? Is there a place for a Pro AV technology set when it's really more about a virtual experience? Something we'll debate as an industry, I think, going forward. So I think that likely we're to see the goalposts move just in terms of total size of market. I think we're pretty good on growth rate, 5-6, let's say it is, from 23 to 28. I'm team optimist just in terms of, I think there is an X factor coming into play with AI. I do think that the ratcheting up of experience, immersive experience, also provides some substantial upside. Esports is perhaps an example of that. very a growing audience market for it, increasing investment from sponsor, from just infrastructure, all the infrastructure that comes from building out that capability. So I see some upside for us as well.
Yeah.
Well, as we go forward.
Stay tuned, everybody. September 2028, we'll be publishing the follow-up podcast to see if we were right.
That's right. Exactly. I'm sure there will be many between that point and now. So thanks, as always, for joining me, Peter, as we explore some growth opportunities for our industry. Join us for the next podcast. Topic to be determined, but I'm sure that
sooner than 2028.
Yeah, sooner than 2028, and probably likely something about AI. Stay tuned. Look forward to seeing you then.